Corky Gonzales was born on June 18, 1928, as the youngest of 8 children and grew up in the east side of Denver by his widowed father during the Great Depression. He managed to graduate from high school in 1944 at the age of 16 and dreamt of pursuing a higher education in engineering, but that was soon crushed when he realized he could not afford a college tuition. After dropping out of college, he became a boxer, and he was in the featherweight category. When he retired as a boxer, he turned to politics in the 1960s, which soon came to an end after a final defeat during his run for Denver mayor in 1967. As a young child, his father always told Corky stories of the Mexican Revolution, their fight against Spanish, and the pride of the Mexican people. These stories resurfaced for Corky and lit his desire to fight for the Latin American community. In 1967, Corky's skills as a writer and use for them in the Chicano movement were seen in his famous poem called Yo Soy Joaquin, which described the endless fight between Latinos and those who tried to silence them, such as the conquistadores in the past and the United States in the present. He ended with the poem reinforcing that the Latino people always persevere and survive. In the mid-1960s, Corky founded the civil rights and cultural movement Crusade for Justice, rising as an important leader in the Chicano movement during the 1960s and 70s. This movement was known for fighting for political, social, and economic justice for the Latino community. Crusade for Justice helped organize and support high school strikes, demonstrations against police brutality, and handle legal cases on behalf of Chicanos framed by corrupt police. Crusade for Justice played an important role in organizing the Chicano Youth Liberation Conferences that brought together many youth across the country to unite the Chicano identity and provide the youth chances to express their views on self-determination. The first conference in 1969 came to the culmination of a document called El Plan Espiritual de Aztlán, which described the idea of ethnic nationality and self-determination in the struggle for Chicano liberation. The second conference in 1970 combined the efforts of those pursuing self-determination into the formation of the Colorado Raza Unida Party. In 1968, Corky led a Chicano section in the Poor People's March in Washington, D.C., and issued his Plan of the Barrio, which demanded better housing, education, locally owned Latino businesses, and restitution of Pueblo lands. In 1969, Corky and the Crusade of Justice organized more than 100 Chicano and Chicana students of Denver's West High School into a walkout to protest the racism within the school and calling for the firing of one teacher who used a racist form of language in class frequently. Alterations occurred numerous times between the police and protesters. The walkout was also a demand for more bilingual education in classes in Chicano literature and history. For decades to come, reforms in Chicago education and history would occur across the country due to Crusade for Justice and its huge involvement in sparking the Chicano youth to stand up for themselves and fight for equality. Ethnic studies are now being implemented, and being bilingual is now celebrated. These are direct effects of Corky Gonzales' work and the thousands of youth who supported him in his mission to elevate Chicanos in the United States. Now, in the times of the pandemic, the Latino community is suffering. Latinos have been facing the most disproportionate impacts from the pandemic, and there aren't many signs of hope. Hispanics and Latinos are 1.7 times more likely to contract COVID-19, 4.1 more times likely to be hospitalized, and 2.8 times more likely to die from COVID-19 in comparison to white people. Latinos and Hispanics also account for 23% of the initial job loss due to the coronavirus pandemic. And even now, over a year since the beginning of the pandemic, the Latino employment rate is still 7.2% below the pre-pandemic number, much more severe compared to 5.2% drop for white Americans. Because the government is slow to address the undocumented rate of citizens, many refuse to reach out because they fear risking deportation. Overall, the effect of the pandemic has been the most severe on the Latin American community because of the disadvantages people of color were against up until only a few decades ago. During Corky's time for the Chicano movement, he strove and worked for equality and for the Latin American community. While he could have foreseen a pandemic occurring, Corky did speak out about how the system is set up to let the people of color, in this case primarily Latinos, be pushed to the bottom of the workforce and be the first ones to take the hit if an economic crisis occurs. He spoke about this in his poem, Yo Soy Joaquin, detailing the struggle of Latino people in history. He wrote, "My fathers have lost the economic battle and won the struggle for cultural survival." He later wrote of Latinos being drafted for the wars in the Cold War, saying, "My blood runs pure on the ice cakes, hills of the Alaskan Isles. on the corpse-strewn beaches of Normandy, the foreign land of Korea, and now Vietnam. Corky was not scared to say that Latinos were set at a disadvantage and though there isn't a draft anymore, Latino families still struggle to survive in a system that's ready to sacrifice them because of their colors and heritage. I hypothesize that the reason why Corky Gonzales is not taught in the traditional history classes is due to the fact that he succeeded in life even with very little post-secondary education. He rose to prominence as a Chicano leader because of his strong virtues and because of his ability to unite people. Now people carry the standard that should they not be educated, they will amount to nothing. Corky Gonzales defied those odds and the racial stereotypes of a Latino, and I believe that is why he's not spoken about, because he can inspire other people and students to stand up and speak out against social injustices, just as he did all those years ago.